In this video, we're going to do a breakdown of one of my athletes, Easton Miller. Easton Miller is the 2024 Colorado Prep Baseball Player of the Year. He threw 51 innings in the spring season, struck out 100, only gave up 8 earned runs on the year. This is a 90-mile-an-hour thrower on average. So we're going to do a quick mechanical breakdown on him so you guys can see what separates him from the rest of the players that aren't working in our program and how you guys can learn from what he does to start throwing 90, start throwing harder, start throwing better stuff, and start striking out more guys, getting better results. So what we'll do when we start with Easton here is we'll always start when I do a mechanical breakdown on any guy that walks in here or works in my program, is we always start from where we are from the stretch. Best place I'm always going to start is what we're going to look for, a thing we call sway. And what that is we're going to try to draw a line through the inside of your heel. Hopefully, usually right around inside the head, but for this purpose, we'll just look at from the inside of his heel. So what we're going to look for here is, does he sway backwards towards second base as he begins his leg lift? So he comes through here, and what you'll notice here is he stays very, very stacked, very strong on that back leg, nice and balanced. He's not swaying backwards towards second base or first base or third base. And that's a clear sign that he's got a lot of core control, he has got a lot of core stability. And the reason we think of sway as an inefficiency in your mechanics is because it's just wasted motion, right? If you are swaying backwards, it doesn't help you in any way, shape, or form. So we want to make sure that we're staying nice and stacked on top of the rubber as we start our leg lift. The next thing we'll look at, we'll go back just a smidge, is what we call hanging back. So we're going to take our line right here to the outside of our foot, and what we want to see is when you get to peak leg lift, we want that our front hip to be past that line ideally as we get there, and you see that he does. So that's why he's not wasting motion, he's not stalling himself up at the top. We want to avoid, especially you high school or JUCO pitchers, we don't want to worry about the balance point anymore. You're at a certain level that you don't need to worry about balance point as much anymore, because hopefully you're athletic enough as we have progressed through our careers. So he started his descent down the mound at peak leg lift. Perfect, phenomenal. All right. The next thing we're going to look for is what we call closing the front side. So as we get to the bottom of our arm swing, right about here, you'll notice that his shoulders are angled up at probably about what angle is that? Right? We're not going to get, I probably could do that. Let me move my head out of the way. Right, anyway, so his shoulders are angled up and his pelvis is angled at about a 9-degree descent here. So what you'll notice is that angle, if these lines were going to continue, they'd be crossing in the backside. Now, normally we don't want to see any kind of crossing, but crossing on the backside I'm cool with. Otherwise, the negative would be if these lines were going to intersect in the front. All right, we don't want to see any kind of intersecting that way with our shoulders being down and our pelvis facing up, because we don't want that, because it makes it very difficult for us to disassociate our shoulders and our pelvis as we work into hip-shoulder separation. So then the next thing we're going to look at is we'll go all the way to the first foot touch, right about there. And you can see that here's one thing that I would ding Easton on in this video, is that you see his shoulder and his arm level, that his hand is below his elbow. Sorry. The reason that's a red flag for us is what we call late arm. So the longer he works into games, the longer and the more that that hand stays below the elbow, the more tired your arm's going to be, and the more your arm's going to have to work to create a lot of extra intensity to be on time with the rest of your body. So that would be the first thing I kind of would ding him on, is just his late arm. Right. The next thing we look for is we get to the same thing as the first strike. So we're going to draw a line right here through the center of Easton's head. You'll see that in relation to this line, his belt buckle is way ahead of the line, which is great. That's something we would call getting out front. So Easton clearly is not getting out front. He's stacking his back leg very effectively and generating a lot of power. Next, what we'll look at is we'll come all the way to full foot strike. Now, here's a little bit of a red flag, goes back to the late arm, that his hand is not where we want it to be at that full foot strike. Right here, we would want his arm to be, we'll progress this just a little bit forward. If his elbow was right here, this clear 90 degrees, as he got to the full foot strike, it would be perfect. Perfect timing, perfect space for that arm to finally just whip around like we want most guys to be feeling. Right? So we'll go back. So you just see that his hand is just a little bit delayed. If we got that arm up just a little bit higher, he'd be cruising. I think he probably threw this about 87 if I recall. But usually sits around 90, 92. So now we're going to go into a biggie for me is we're going to look at our lead foot, our lead leg. And so what you're going to notice is as we get to full foot strike here, we want to see, ideally that we don't want to see that this leg is going to continue forward, right? We want to have a nice strong front leg as he comes into extension. Beautiful, no collapsing, and he starts straightening that leg out as he comes into release. That is what we call a proper lead leg block. What that leg should be used as an emergency brake, and is what's going to stop all of your linear momentum to allow you to get into more rotational momentum. Right? There's a reason he throws as hard as he does. All right, so strong front leg gets through, and then we're going to come to our next piece, which is going to be what we know as high hand. What you'll notice here, and this might be a little bit of a shoulder issue that he's had in the past, where he's just not as mobile, or it could just be the angle of his arm, where if we draw this line right here through the center of his elbow, you can see how that hand is above that line. We want to see ideally that this hand is on or below that line. That means we're getting max layback, right? So what he could be doing, and what's probably actually hurting him, is if we actually look, and this is another one that we would ding him on, is this high hand, but it might not be a shoulder issue. It might actually be taking the line from the shoulder all the way to the butt, and there's not, what we want to generally see is that there's a gap in between that line in the lower back, and that's what we call early flexion. If we're starting to flex forward a bit too early, it actually causes some arm issues where we're not getting the max layback because we're not extending our spine the way we should be. So those are the big things on the front side, or from the side mechanics for Easton. Now let's go take a look at the back side. So now taking a look at the backside for Easton's mechanics, we're going to look specifically for three things. We're going to look for early extension, flying open, and high hand. Just kind of maybe see if we can confirm that high hand. So what you're going to look for here for early extension, and this is the #1 killer of power in the pitching motion, right? So this is a very critical move that we want to avoid. So if we draw a line through the center of Easton's heel, and what we're basically going to look for, as you watch my shoddy camera work, we're going to come back, draw another line right there through the center of through his heel, straight up. We want to see, as a pitcher descends down the mound, that his butt stays on the line all the way through. So what you're going to look for here is as he descends down, beautiful, 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 then he begins his rotation, and that line is still on his butt, which is great. It means he's, like I said early on, he's utilizing his back leg very effectively, and he's generating enough power, and he's utilizing it in the correct way, rotating at the right point. So now we'll go back to the top, and we'll take a look at flying open. So we're going to take Easton all the way to full foot strike, and you can see how his hips are beginning to open up just like that, and his shoulders are still fairly closed off. Right, so I wouldn't ding him for closing the front or flying open on this one. I think he's holding it very effectively, and you can see what he's got this huge separation between his spine and his hips, the torso and the hips, the shoulders and the hips, however you want to call it. Very good separation there, creating a massive rubber band effect as he begins his rotation down the mound into ball release. What was that, 85 there? So that would make a lot of sense. So then the last thing I want to look at for Easton here is to take a look again at his high hand. So we'll come all the way to max external rotation. And you see that it actually looks a lot better here on the backside, where we drew a line through his shoulder plane. The ball's just above the line, but like we talked about earlier in the video, that might be more of a early flexion issue than it is an actual shoulder issue. So what we would probably cue him on if we were working with him now, he's down at school now, but working on his spine extension and working on cleaning up or shortening his arm action in the back to make sure that it gets on time with the rest of his body. But I mean, this kid's got it figured out. He knows what he's doing. He throws into the low nines. He's a D1 commit, Colorado Player of the Year. Everything that he did in our program has really helped him to become the player that he is currently. So that's a breakdown of Easton Miller's mechanics. If you guys ever want a mechanical breakdown from me, feel free to follow me on Instagram at ColeThomasFast, and we can make a video for you, and we can break down your mechanics, see what you're struggling with, why you're not seeing the results you want, and we can go from there. I'll see you guys in the next video.